It was the night of the 31st of March, 2006, a Friday. Spring break had just begun at Ohio State University, and for 27-year-old medical student Brian Schaefer, it was a well-earned break. He'd been pushing himself hard, juggling long nights of study with the recent loss of his mother, who had passed away from cancer just weeks earlier. Friends said he was coping the best he could, but the grief was still heavy. To shake off some of the stress, Brian made plans to go out that night with his friend, Clint Florence. They started the evening with a casual dinner at a local steakhouse, then made their way to the campus nightlife, bar hopping and laughing like any pair of college friends would. At around 1:15 in the morning, they arrived at a place called the Ugly Tuna Saloona, a popular college bar located in a second-floor space above a bustling strip of businesses. Security cameras captured Brian entering the bar with Clint and another friend. The footage is clear. He's smiling, relaxed, and shows no signs of being in distress. They ordered drinks, mingled with the crowd, and sometime later, Clint said he lost track of Brian. That wasn't unusual. Brian was known for wandering off to talk to people or even step outside for air. But what was unusual was what happened next. As the night ended, Clint and the others tried calling Brian's phone. No answer. They assumed he had gone home early, but by the next morning, it became clear something was wrong. Brian didn't show up for anything. He didn't answer calls, didn't contact his girlfriend, Alexis, who had been expecting him, and the scariest part? He was supposed to fly to Miami with her that very Monday. It was a trip they'd planned for months, a chance to relax, to maybe start fresh. When Brian didn't board the flight, Alexis waited at the airport for hours, pacing and checking her phone. He never showed. Now here's where things take a strange turn. Police reviewed the surveillance footage from the bar, and it showed Brian entering but never leaving. There was one main entrance, which also served as the only public exit. Cameras covered it completely. He's seen walking in, but never coming out. Not once. Detectives searched every inch of the bar and the surrounding area. The Ugly Tuna sat on the second floor, and while there was a back service door, it opened into a construction zone filled with debris, exposed wiring, and uneven flooring. It would have been dangerous to navigate, especially for someone who had been drinking. But even if Brian had somehow gone that way, there were no cameras in the alley and no evidence that he ever passed through it. Cadaver dogs were brought in. His phone was pinged, but there was no new activity. His bank accounts stayed untouched. It was as if he'd just vanished from the face of the earth. His dad, Randy Schaefer, never gave up. He posted flyers all over the city and even kept a porch light on for Brian, hoping he'd walk through the door someday. But tragedy struck again. In 2008, Randy died in a freak accident after a tree fell during a storm. At his funeral, someone posted a message online saying, "Dad, I love you, Brian." But investigators traced the message and found it came from a public computer in a different state. It was most likely a cruel prank. To this day, no one knows what happened to Brian Schaefer. There were no signs of a struggle, no confirmed sightings, and no good explanations. Some think he left intentionally, trying to escape grief and start over. Others believe something much darker happened that night inside the Ugly Tuna. But the biggest question remains. How does someone walk into a bar in front of a camera and never walk out? It was supposed to be a fun night. On the evening of the 3rd of November, 2018, Tamla Horsford, a 40-year-old mother of 5, arrived at a sleepover party in Forsyth County, Georgia. The event was hosted by Jean Myers, a friend of Tamla's, to celebrate her birthday. The guest list included 7 other women and 3 men, most of them middle-aged, all of them white. Tamla was the only black woman at the party. The plan was simple food, drinks, football, and fun. Tamla showed up with a bottle of tequila, smiling and dressed in a white onesie covered in paw prints. The atmosphere seemed light. People joked, took selfies, and posted videos to social media. According to the guests, Tamla had been drinking that night, but didn't appear intoxicated. She was laughing, watching a football game, and at one point stepped outside for a smoke on the balcony. By 1:30 a.m., most of the guests had gone to bed. Tamla reportedly stayed up a bit longer, hanging out in the kitchen with one of the men who was still awake. At some point, she stepped out to the balcony one last time. That's the last time anyone claims to have seen her alive. The next morning, around 7:30 a.m., one of the hosts looked out the back window and saw Tamla's body face down in the yard, directly beneath the balcony. She was lying in the grass in a pool of blood. Her onesie was dirty, and one of her socks was missing. The official story from police? They said Tamla must have fallen from the balcony during the night. They claimed alcohol played a role, and that her death was an accident. Case closed. But the autopsy results raised questions. Tamla had sustained multiple injuries, not just from a fall. She had a broken neck, a dislocated wrist, cuts on her face and arms, and trauma to her torso. One medical examiner described it as more consistent with a physical struggle than a simple fall. Even more suspicious, the scene was reportedly cleaned up before officers arrived, and some of the guests, including the homeowner, had connections to law enforcement. One of the men at the party, who claimed he barely knew Tamla, was later caught attempting to access her death report while working at the local courthouse. Tamla's family didn't buy the accident explanation. They believed something had gone terribly wrong that night, and that someone at the party knew more than they were saying. The case exploded on social media, especially in 2020 during the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. People demanded the case be reopened, pointing to inconsistencies, missing timelines, and potential racial bias in the investigation. And eventually, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation did reopen the case, but in 2021, they concluded there was no evidence of foul play. Once again, the official story was that Tamla died from a tragic fall. But here's the problem. How does a healthy woman fall from a balcony and end up with injuries that suggest more than just gravity? Why was there so little urgency to investigate a death surrounded by so many unanswered questions? To this day, the people who were there that night maintain their innocence. But Tamla's family and thousands of others who followed her story still believe the truth hasn't come out. And maybe it never will. It started off like any other summer trip. In June 2014, 28-year-old Lars Mittank left Germany for a beach vacation in Varna, Bulgaria. He went with a group of friends, looking forward to some sun, soccer, and a break from everyday life. Lars was a calm and quiet guy, close to his family, and working a stable job at a power plant. He wasn't the kind of person you'd expect to vanish without a trace. At first, the trip was going well. They hung out at the beach, went out drinking, and enjoyed the nightlife. But near the end of the holiday, something happened that changed everything. One night, Lars got into a small argument at a bar with a group of strangers over a football rivalry. He supported Werder Bremen, and the others were fans of a rival team. It didn't seem like a serious fight, but Lars ended up getting punched in the side of the head. He complained about pain the next morning and visited a doctor who told him he had a ruptured eardrum. The doctor gave him antibiotics and advised him not to fly until it healed. That meant Lars had to stay behind while his friends flew home. He told them he'd be fine and booked a room at a cheap hotel near the airport. But over the next 24 hours, things took a strange and disturbing turn. From the moment he checked into the hotel, Lars began acting paranoid. He called his mother in a whisper and said he felt unsafe. He told her that someone was following him and begged her to cancel all his credit cards. His voice was tense and scared. Something was clearly wrong. That night, He left the hotel for several hours, and no one knows where he went. When he came back the next morning, security footage showed him pacing around the lobby, looking over his shoulder and behaving like he was being watched. At one point, he left again, then returned shortly after. He seemed confused, like he didn't know where to go or who to trust. The next morning, the 8th of July, Lars arrived at Varna Airport. He even made it through check-in and spoke to the airport doctor about his ear, but during the conversation, something spooked him. His mood changed fast. He stood up, said something like, "I don't want to die here," and suddenly ran out of the room. Security cameras captured everything. Lars sprinted out of the airport terminal, leaving behind his backpack, wallet, phone, and passport. He ran across the parking lot, then disappeared into the woods near the airport. No one ever saw him again. Police searched the area for days. Helicopters were used, dogs were brought in, but there was no sign of him. He seemed to have vanished into thin air. His mother, desperate for answers, put up missing posters and followed every possible lead, including supposed sightings of Lars in different parts of Europe. None of them were confirmed. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened. Some believe he had a mental health episode, possibly triggered by the antibiotics he was taking. Others think he was being chased by someone, and that his paranoia was real. There are so many questions. Why would a young man with a normal life suddenly believe he was in danger? Why would he run from an airport in broad daylight, leaving everything behind? And how can someone vanish on camera in a public place and never be found? The footage of Lars running out of that terminal is haunting. He looks terrified, like he's trying to escape something no one else can see. And after that moment, it's as if he stopped existing. The disappearance of Lars Mittank is one of the most chilling unsolved cases in recent memory. A man runs into the woods, and the world never hears from him again. And the scariest part is, we still have no idea why.